Happy New Year. Hey, all you Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse. Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplace is going to change our world, this is our year, 2026. We've been talking about it for a while now. We're going to dive right in today. So we got a great episode for you. We're talking about bringing together cybersecurity and GRC, two of the best friends in the organization. As we get going, we're at 666. Is that an omen? Okay, we're past that. Okay, we're at over 700 emojis so far. So crack those fingers. Let's get those going. Drop in where you're coming from today. Drop in your LinkedIn URL. Remember, your network is your net worth. You did a lot to build your network last year. Let's double it this year. So drop in where you're coming from. Drop in your temp maybe. It's really nice here in Charlotte. And we are going to dive in. We gave out, we did 500 hours of content last year. We gave out almost 500,000 CEUs. A round of applause to the Ethico team. We finally got accredited by the Compliance Certification Board, so that's phenomenal. So those CEUs are going to be coming out a lot faster. This is your place to build your network, to share your insights, and to get free credits because we love you so much, and to get free books because we're giving out more and more books. So Hema and Ashley put out now a trilogy, okay? This is not a fantasy romance trilogy. This is a trilogy of implementation and culture building ideas. So that book is available. If you didn't win one last year, it came out right around Christmas. Now's the time to do it. So we're going to be featuring those books. And we're also featuring our good friend, Allison Taylor's book, Higher Ground, which if you haven't read that, time to get familiar and time to gear up for the new year. If you have not seen the Ethico Year in Review, you should see it. So we will put that in the chat, I guess. And we put out so many different toolkits last year. Thank you all for your input on all the different topics that we covered in the Ethicsverse. We have more than doubled this community that we're all a part of over the last 12 months. And you know me, I want to double it again. I just like trying to double my double. So we're going to double it again this year. So spread the word to your friends. Let's get more folks into the Ethicsverse, because as this network grows, the richness, the robustness of this network grows, and that kind of multiplies our impact if we participate. Look at all these chats coming. Man, oh man, I've been like, this is me trying to find a vein. I have been fiending for the Ethicsverse. We took like 2 weeks off, which seems like an eternity. So we have MySim. This is the Ethico platform for case management. It's better than ever. We continue to pour millions of dollars into our development every single year based on insights from people on the front lines, not from some white-haired, no offense, some white-haired guy who flies into a private equity board meeting. We want this tool to really help multiply your impact inside the organization. So we're making tons of enhancements to this. And so now is the time. If you are thinking about changing this year, or you just want to see what else is out there, drop a 1 in the chat. Someone will reach out to you. Of course, go to your homepage, which should be ethico.com, and click for a demo. So, also, we got a really cool new workflow automation system inside the case management system to take more and more of that work off of your plate. As we step into the age of AI, the name of the game is trying to, create leverage where we can and increase the proportion of our time that is spent making decisions. We, as humans, have a much bigger context window for now. We have a much bigger context window than AI, and it's on us to get smart about how we can leverage technology to spend more of our time, make better bets with our time. And so having smart software can help you do that, all right? Now, if you don't know Matt Kelly, time to get familiar. If you have not signed up for the Radical Compliance weekly newsletter, I want you to go Control-T, that's Control-Tab, create a new tab, Command-T, create a new tab, go to Radical Compliance right now. On the right side, you'll see a place to drop in your email address. And what's nice about Matt is it's just gold content. It's just diamonds. This guy just sheds gems for you all the time. So if you're not following him on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. If you are not following him on, the newsletter, time to do it. Let's talk a little bit about our guest spotlight. So Essential Counseling. This is transformative risk management. Tell us a little bit about Essential before we dive in here.
Yeah, no, it's appreciate being on. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
All you.
All right. So Essential, we are just a boutique consulting firm that helps organizations build out governance risk compliance programs, enterprise risk programs, and compliance programs that enable technology to do it, heavily focused around building enterprise GRC programs that are right sized for the organization. I myself am an attorney by trade, but have been in the GRC space now for about 15 years, practicing on the ethics side, the compliance side, the risk side, and in the last 10 years being focused really around GRC program development and tool implementation. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, glad to have you. Welcome to the Ethicsverse. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for these new guests we have, okay? This is 2026, man. This is like our year to shine. All right. And let's also introduce AIM. Give us a little rundown of AIM.
Yes, hello, my name is Alexandra and I am from Copenhagen. So as of now, I'm already in the compliance field more than 15 years, so we're the same with Andrew. And AIM is the platform for the audit integrity and management. It's basically my core about the audit, about the internal controls, and we're helping especially the internal auditors and internal controls, so that basically the second line of defense, to grow, to have a webinar seminar. So it's not like a consulting per se, but it is the educational platform. So thank you for having me here tonight.
Glad to have you. Love that logo, by the way. All right, so we got the one and only coolest guy in compliance. What a way to kick off the Ethicsverse in 2026. Matt Kelly guiding us through an amazing conversation. Over to you, Matt.
Sure. Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you to everybody who's joining us and our two speakers, Alexandra and Andrew. So we are here today, as one of our slides said earlier in the presentation, to talk about cybersecurity and GRC programs and how they overlap. This idea actually came to us from an Ethicsverse listener. And of course, we love that. We're always looking for ideas that are relevant to the listeners. So if you have one you want to put on the schedule, send it in to us and we will give it some thought, see what we can do. But basically, this woman was saying that she has frameworks for data privacy. She's got frameworks for effective internal control for financial reporting under SOX. We have frameworks for data management. If you are in Europe, as Alexa is, you might have ISO standards for something else. We are awash in frameworks. And this woman was saying, it seems to me that so many of these frameworks dance around cybersecurity. And therefore, if I build a strong cybersecurity platform and meld my GRC efforts around cybersecurity, everything gets a lot easier to manage. And she basically said, is that true? I'm not sure. And if it is true, how do we make it work in practice? I said, I don't know, but that's a great idea for the Ethicsverse. And that is why we are here today. So as always, if you do have suggestions or questions or comments about what we're talking about, feel free to pop it into the chat and we'll weave your questions in as quickly as we can. But we have Alexandra joining us from Copenhagen. We have Andrew Gunter, who is joining us from Minnesota. And I am just going to start by turning this question over to kind of like to clarify, what do we even mean here? Andrew, I'll put it to you first, and then Alexa, and then Nick. But I mean, as I said, I've heard it described as if you get your cybersecurity controls right, compliance issues become a lot easier. So is that right? Is that what aligning GRC and cyber means? Like, what is the big theme that we're trying to unpack here from my listeners' frustrations that she had sent in?
No, I appreciate it. And I would say it's right, but I think we're focusing right now really on what I would call like IT GRC, which would be like your IT policies, the frameworks, the regulations, the control standards, and the controls. But I want to take it even a little bit further, is that when we talk GRC, I like to think about it more holistically from an enterprise GRC, because I think at the crux of the question is, how can cybersecurity integrated with your IT GRC program and your broader GRC program provide value and provide both to the cybersecurity programs, to the compliance groups, but to the risk group? Because when I think of GRC, I'm thinking of your enterprise risk management teams, your audit teams, your various compliance teams, your third party, your business continuity, and all those begin to play a component in it. And so if I take that concept, I begin to think, okay, how can a strong cybersecurity compliance program impact us from a risk perspective? I end up doing probably 3 to 5 enterprise risk assessments a year as part of my practice, working with organizations on talking to senior leaders, execs regarding what do they see as their top risk. And these can be strategic, operational, but without fail, at every single organization, every single industry, one of the top 5 risks is always cybersecurity. It's just poses that big of a risk. And when it comes to GRC, I always like to say the R in it, the risk, is the why we do everything else. it is that we have a major risk that we need to address, that we need to treat. And so beginning to look to say, hey, we're going to focus on building out a strong cyber control program tied back to our regs, tied back to our frameworks, and importantly, tied back to our risk, provides us better insight, visibility, and from a chief risk compliance and CISO perspective, a little bit better assurance that we have what we need to in place and in mitigating that risk all the way up to the board level visibility.
All right. And Alexa, give me your views as well, but let me put a bit more meat around what the question is. Like, I can say there are probably many listeners here who come from an anti-corruption background, and they're worried about anti-bribery. But I know a audit friend of mine who insists this is a cyber issue, because if somebody is committing bribery in your company, that person, someone somewhere, is doing something they are not authorized to do. They're smuggling in a vendor they shouldn't, or they are fabricating a contract, but they were acting beyond what they were able to do. And she's like, that is a problem of cybersecurity. You somehow manipulated the role in your IT system so you could do this when you're really only allowed to do this. And so that's his soapbox that he's on. I don't know if he's right. I don't know if he's wrong. But Alexandra, how do you see this issue and how cybersecurity, how much is it a foundation for all of this, or what else needs to happen? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for putting it, as you said, like adding a little bit meat into that. And of course, I'm sitting here from the audit and the second line of defense, not like a cyber guy. And but of course, I'm very much connected to the cyber. So I would be looking into this from that angle. So of course, my reply would be yes. And that's very logical, because nowadays we are operating in the application-based environment, and the cyber is foundation. So basically, as you mentioned, if our cyber walls fall, like they are crumbled, then entire house would be falling apart. And of course, as you also mentioned, if the controls, cyber controls are not set up, or ITGC controls are not set up correctly, then our compliance program are falling apart. And I'm coming also from this SOX environment. We had always this thumb rule, which said that if 60% of your the 60% of your IT controls are securing your entire compliance programs. But it doesn't mean that the business controls are not playing the key role here. And here I would give you a very, very maybe basic example, but that would be easy to comprehend for to our diverse audience today. So let's assume we have a perfect patches, like cybersecurity is perfect. Let me put this. Someone is stealing money from the bank account because there is no, I'm not talking, and they're correct, the access rights controls. Then what we would do in this case, are we preventing ourselves from the fraud? Probably not. Are we going to pass all the audits? Probably not, especially if we are operating in the SOX environment. So in my opinion, this response, not yes or no. Yes, of course, it's the heart of the cyber is the heart of the compliance. But I think we need to not look into that in the like a siloed way. We need to think from the perspective of the different frameworks like HIPAA, NIST, GDPR, whatever we want to consider. And all of them, they are talking the same thing. And what Andrew mentioned it stands for risks. We are looking into the risk perspective. But how, I think we need to ask that question from another perspective. So if the cybersecurity control, like let's say technical control fails, does it break a business objectivity? Does it breaks the business controls? So that's how we basically need to look into that, not in isolation, but somehow framing that from the different angles. I hope I gave you what you wanted, and happy to hear the follow-up questions from the audience.
Sure.
I would love to add. Mind if I add on to that really quick, Matt? Because I loved what you said, because what kind of clicked for me too is that when you talk about like risk, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is you're talking about a fraud risk. And we're also talking about a cybersecurity risk. Risk doesn't really care about the organizational boundaries that we try to put into place. we try to say that cyber owns cyber risk, but really cyber risk impacts multiple other areas. Controls can impact different risks. And what we begin to show is that a strong program from a GRC perspective, where we're looking at risk holistically and we're addressing compliance issues and building out controls, can have impacts in ways that may not be the core reason we're addressing it, but can begin to be identified through building this thing out. So it really shows the complexity of the world that we're dealing with, that we want this clean line of saying, we're going to build out a cybersecurity control because we want to solve a cybersecurity problem, but really that could also solve other issues in the compliance space that may not be as readily apparent when we first start talking about it.
So, Nick, let me circle back to you here. And first, I'm going to pick up on something Andrew said, where the risk doesn't necessarily care if it's cyber or fraud or anything else. I'm going to rephrase that to the risk does not care what its first name is. I'm going to patent that. Anybody wants
That's
to
a
put
book
it
right there. That's a book. Yeah.
Go ahead. But I mean, I guess that's where we're trying to go here. From a management team's perspective, they just want to know, is the risk managed? I don't care what the first name of the risk is, because if it's not managed, it's still going to trip me up. And I get it that I guess maybe cyber could cut across a whole lot of those first names. If you address it well, everything else gets a lot easier. Like, Nick, what do you think here?
I think, kind of to what Alexandra said, we have to look at these in a non-siloed way. There's this kind of like human kind of firewall fallacy that can kind of creep in when we look at this stuff in a siloed way. And, what I was thinking about is like, what's the safest car? Is it still Volvo? Like, if you get a Volvo, that doesn't make you a better driver. That doesn't even necessarily reduce the risk that like you get into an accident. It just makes that accident, more safe, or like it makes you safer in that accident. And so to the extent that like cybersecurity is kind of building walls or building these protections, we have to look at that as an extension of the conscience that comes from GRC or that comes from the ethics team, because there's always a way around these things, right? Like someone can open up that vault door and let something in from a bribe perspective or something like that. So I think looking at it on that more holistic way, which again can be difficult, and sometimes we want to rely on these myriad, frameworks and stuff like that are out there. Looking at it on a more holistic way and seeing how it's kind of more hand in glove than two separate things, I think can open up some opportunities for us to reduce those risks. To your point, that management doesn't care kind of about the source of it; they care about like what is the impact and is it actually occurring.
So let me just then move on a bit to what the actual work is. I mean, I think that we kind of have sold people on the theory behind this, but how would you actually get that alignment done between the compliance team, the IT security team, or maybe the IT team if it is separate from the security team? Like, what are we doing? Is it a matter of you find all the frameworks we're using, you line them up, you see where the cyber overlap is, you start there? Like, have I oversimplified it? I'll go in the same order again, starting with you, Andrew, and then Alexa, and then Nick. But like, what do we do?
Yeah, and I'll say we will always oversimplify it when we talk about here's the 5 easy steps you need to align your teams across the board. It's very complex, but I think the frameworks are part of it. But what I have found is actually it's even before that point is even defining key terms, and it sounds so basic. But there's so many times that we go into an organization and we hear is we need to put in a risk register. And when they say that, what they actually mean is an issues management. And then you go to a different team in the same organization, they'll use entirely different terms. We wrote a blog, I think, 5 years ago, difference between risk, issue, and incident. 1 pager. Month over month, it's in the top 5 blog posts that gets hit 5 years later. And so like that relevance tells me that people continue to have that same question around basic theory when it comes to risk and compliance and just GRC in general. And so when I come in with trying to align organizations, usually it's finding the right people and then understanding what's that structure that we're really trying to put in place. How do risk and controls interrelate? How does that tie into enterprise risks? How do controls tie to standards, tie to policies, ties to frameworks? And understanding that mapping and aligning that mapping needs to be done before we get to the spot of what frameworks do we have and how do those tie to controls? Because if we don't know where all the data kind of fits and how we're going to structure it, we're going to be 5 steps ahead and miss some very fundamental basics that we need to get in place first.
All right. Alexa, what would you say? How do we get started here? What's the actual job?
Yeah, I like to talk about the actual job, and I like what also Andrew said, so I can only agree with that. So, and again, for me, it's from that question, it's very tempting just to, open up the spreadsheet and start mapping every NIST or ISO COVID towards SOX, and then we kind of, that for me would be natural alignment. That's tempting.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would actually do, I think we need to move away from just the mapping frameworks, and that's a regular trap and a common trap that I could see among my peers. But we need to start, instead of mapping the frameworks, we need to start mapping the common controls. And we discussed it already in the first question. So as an auditor, and again, I'm just wearing this hat of the auditor, I don't want to test the access controls in a 5 different dimensions, using the 5 different frameworks just to prove. And this is also not efficient and effective for the organization, especially when we talk about the SOX environments where we need to test by the auditor, the external auditor, or extensive testing that costs money for the company. So that's why I think what I would basically start, we need to find the source of the truth, and coming to the to the cyber, that will be usually cyber team's baseline configuration. That's our source of the truth, and then we need to tag this to the specific requirements that the company separate. That could be COVID, as I mentioned, HIPAA, SOX, whatever you're reporting to, and then the IT cyber teams and the compliance regular teams need to agree on what is the common evidence we need to achieve, just to be very, very practical for that specific control. And then, in my opinion, and that's based on my experience, that friction that could disappear. I'm not saying it would disappear, but at least it would be eliminated to some extent. And then we would stop arguing about what every rule says and working in silos, but start focusing on what the control actually needs to be performed and what evidence we need to populate. That would be my practical response to that.
I agree with everything. Oops, sorry, Matt. I keep cutting you off there, but I just wanted to build on that because I think you nailed it with the response of everything you said. And what I have found too is organizations, sometimes we say we're compliant, we've implemented a framework, and then they go to test that framework. But what they failed to take the next step is, what are the actual controls that apply to the organization, and truly understand what is the risk and how does that apply to our environment. And instead of just saying we're going to take NIST and just follow it to its core, is that you're missing an element there of the actual application, because that application is where we make it applicable to the business and actually begin to mitigate the risks that we're talking about. Sorry, Matt, back to you. It's
no, that's a phenomenal point. That's a critical point. You can't just kind of like implement it. Otherwise, you're just going to be kind of LARPing. You're LARPing your way through NIST, and it's not actually applied. It's not actually integrated. You're not getting the benefit of this framework in the context, again, of your business.
Well, that was the question I wanted to pose. And Nick, I'll start with you maybe, is that I'm struck that we're spending a lot of time talking about the teams need to agree. We need to have common terms. We need to define what we're doing here. Like before we even get to implementing this framework or that framework or tagging various risks to various controls, I'm still struck on how much it is convincing everybody to hold hands and look in the same direction at the same time, and just how hard that can be. And like, why is it that hard to build all of the common consensus? What would you say?
Well, not to be a cynic, but I think it's classic human stuff, right? It's like, well, this is mine and this is yours, and the twins that have the freaking tape down the middle of the room. It's that kind of thing. And I think we don't, I think this is me, but don't start with the framework, start with a beer. Like we have to build those relationships, and we have to align with these people that are, it's so easy for humans to fall into otherism or tribalism, even within an organization. And we have to at least kind of knock those kind of tribal silo walls down, remind us all that we're all wearing the same jersey. We're all trying to put the same, points on the same side of the scoreboard. And I think if we can start with that relationship, align those goals across these disparate departments or these different individuals whose participation and cooperation we need to achieve whatever ends in this case, risk reduction in a sustainable way. I think starting there allows for any application of whatever framework or whatever sort of patchwork of frameworks you're going to apply to your specific situation. It really increases the odds that those will actually work,
Here's a question from the audience. I hope we don't derail our whole conversation. It's a good one and it's a tricky one, but they're basically saying, shouldn't IT security, or should the cybersecurity function, should it not report in to IT? Isn't it more, they I guess, have it report into legal or have it report into a risk management function? But weak cybersecurity causes risk, so therefore it should be that. And it shouldn't be the security team answers into the IT team. What do you think? Andrew, what would you say?
Who watches
to
the
that?
watchers? You know what I mean? I agree with that.
But I mean, clearly cybersecurity is important, but implicit in that question is we don't know what cybersecurity is. Is it a technical thing or is it a risk reduction thing?
I mean, I don't even know what the IT guys do. You know what I mean? To your point.
Well, I think the argument I usually see of why they're in IT is that there's just kind of this natural relationship that already exists between those groups. And if there's a culture of compliance is number one, we're going to do the right thing, it's a lot easier. But that's where I've seen this issue come up, even in organizations that have very strong do the right things culture, is that when you have your IT compliance, your IT security individuals reporting into the owners of the IT products, there is pressure to bypass controls, to bring risk levels down artificially. And I've seen that play out with poor results ultimately. So my preference is always, yes, maybe IT cybersecurity should be part of your overall risk of compliance function. It can vary depending upon organization, but there is a risk to be had by putting your watchers in the watching group, or the watchers part of the same group that owns them. So it's there is a conflict there.
And I mean, perhaps this is just kind of like a vestigial holdover from like when computers were new. Here, let's put all this sort of computer IT stuff together in this one group. It's kind of akin though to like if the financial auditors are part of the finance function, like that's nobody would say that that's like a best practice. I'm going to take this and run with it. I think it's exactly spot on. It's just kind of a default thing. Oh, you're a computer guy. You understand all this cyber stuff. You're kind of over here. Right. You wouldn't have your internal auditors or your like internal financial auditors part of reporting up to the CFO. You just wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you, Nick, because I think if it should be somehow the cybersecurity, it's kind of in between of first and the second line. It's not purely the second line, but concerning this financial auditors, if they are, if the internal audit is reporting to the CFO, then we have an absolute conflict. And that's the same with the cybersecurity. But on the other hand, if they are absolutely independent, then we lose that operativeness. So I think we kind of need to find this middleman and put them in the middle somehow, and still putting the second line or the compliance team observing, having that independence. Maybe that would be maybe the best approach.
Here is a great.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, just a great comment from one other listener here who points out to everybody, let's all remember that the IT department is the biggest security risk that you have at the company.
Right.
That's true. So true. So true.
Andrew, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I would just say is that for most organizations, we'll continue to find cyber and IT to be one-on-one. And this is where I just think goes back to Nick. You kind of nailed it with your conversation around relationships. And this is where formalized dotted lines that can go beyond relationships, where your cybersecurity groups can have a line directly to the chief compliance officer, who can help escalate things all the way to the board if needed, who has that line of sight. So making sure that if we are going to go with this approach, which seems to be the common one, we do have those ways that we can escalate things properly that go outside of the straight up reporting chains where things can get buried because people don't want bad news to come out.
No.
That's a great point, saying I made a great point. Just kidding. But we have these kind of controls in place, or we have these principles. We have these principles in place. When somebody wants to report about the compliance team, they can report directly to the board. That's a principle to sort of sidestep. And there's that sort of dotted line access to this other body that's above it that can help get something escalated or so forth. It's interesting, though, how there's, other kind of pictures of these similar type relationships where those, to your point, those dotted lines don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So another question that I had when I was thinking about this idea sort of in general from my non-technical perspective is I wondered how much framework overload, the problem there is we wind up with too many control activities. We've got to do controls for HIPAA and GDPR and NIST and Lord knows what else. So we have a whole bunch of controls. They're all kind of sort of the same. The business units, of course, hate this. But how much then should we really be shifting more to a focus on designing better controls that are more simple and secure but universal? Is that what this is all about? If there are very smartly secure, smartly designed controls, could we have fewer of them that are better and therefore we have less of a burden on the business? Like, is that what we're aiming to achieve here, is better control design and less just, implementing controls and documenting until the cows come home? Alexa, what would you say? And then I'll put it to Andrew and then Nick.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And it's actually very much connected to the maturity, because as long as you're maturing in your governance way, then you need to think about the simplification and controls rationalization. So it's very much important to think about that you are not doing a lot. So it's not about the volume, but rather than design. So back in the days when I was a young compliance specialist, I was thinking that as many controls I could design, that's better. That was for me the ultimate KPI. Of course, I'm not thinking like this for now, but I think in the compliance world, we called those controls as zombie controls that are basically very declarative, and they are only exist in the, let's say, in the procedures, or there's procedures that are not being updated. So we need to, this alignment is actually aiming to reduce that and to simplify the controls and to minimize the fatigue on the organization. Because if we have more loads on the employees, that means that our alignment actually failed. That's a very, very good KPI for that. So, and in my opinion, we need to move forward the controls by design. And you said the good design, but it should be the controls by design, because when we talk about the general compliance, like GRC and the cyber, we need to think about the compliance by design, or the controls by design. So, and in this case, of course, maybe I would express not the most popular opinion in this AI era. So we need to think about more automated controls. I like this expression that every process needs to survive the person, because where the person is, then we would never implement fully like the governance. So that's why we always need to think about the preventive / for me now it's / IT dependent or automated controls, and avoid this very expensive, rigid, detective, and especially manual controls. So we need to start together with cybersecurity, with IT folks, to think what we can automate and where we can automate, where we can make it more, instead of 3-5 controls like a manual ones, even like a business controls, where we can by design to make it better, to make it simple but effective and auditable. That's also very much important. So that's a very sweet spot, I would say. Yeah.
Andrew, what would you say? And I loved Alexa's point about zombie controls. That's another great term that we have here. Yes. But how much can cybersecurity kill off the zombie controls if we start from there and like design better, smarter controls? Like, what should we be thinking about here?
I like to think about it from, we have a problem in the GRC space of first line fatigue, burning them out with the number of asks we put on them. And when we run into that problem, we run into the issues of the evidence that we receive, the controls that are documented, the execution around it are ultimately diminished, versus having quality controls make a bigger impact. And so as a second line, third line professionals, that should be one of our goals of diminishing the amount of control activities we really need to achieve this. And in cybersecurity, if aligned with IT compliance and your broader GRC stake, you should see that outcome. And when I hear organizations say, we went through this GRC efforts and control activity spiked, there's probably a root cause analysis that needs to happen here, because there's a couple different ways that this played out. One is you didn't have the controls in place to begin with. And so those control activities that are increased actually should have been there all along. So yes, there is a reason why it increased. The other one is we didn't do the work that Alex is talking about. We didn't actually do the alignment. And this isn't what I found a one-time exercise. It is one you kind of go through that process and you recycle, and you're going to continuously refine. And as your IT environment continues to modify, so will your control environment. And so it is a continuous exercise, but we're always looking at how can we properly mitigate risk, and how do we do so that right sizes the program for first line to keep them engaged in providing the best possible outcome from our compliance perspective.
And I think to your point, when you engage in that iterative process, it causes you to go back and look at, are these controls serving me, or are we just kind of adding more and more controls? Are we creating the circumstances for this like zombie control apocalypse? People are going to find workarounds. Like controls usually kind of create some friction. Human beings are like water. They take that path of least resistance. If we're overloading with controls and they're not these sort of silent controls or these sort of invisible controls, we're increasing the odds for like more workaround risk, which is really hard to quantify in a risk assessment. Who's going to like even attest to that? I know this control is in place, but I go around it. So I think it's really about starting with the end in mind, starting with like, what are the real nightmares happening? Our good friend Reed Blackman just wrote this new book called The Ethical Nightmare Challenge, and he is an expert in AI, and he helps build AI programs, like AI risk programs for large organizations. And this book he just put out is about starting with that nightmare, like what is the nightmare scenario, and then we need to work back from that to make sure that like we can steer around that pothole, or make sure the car doesn't go off the cliff. And I think if we can have that kind of outcome-based thinking, it now frees us up to reconsider the controls that are in place, A, and B, take the best from these various different frameworks and apply them as a patchwork, like you were saying, to our specific business scenario, our specific constraints, and so forth.
And, Andrew, I just want to say, I love the point that you had raised, and maybe if you want to unpack it a little more, about if you've implemented a new GRC program, tool, framework, whatever, and suddenly the control activity spike, slow down and figure out why. And is that because you had been doing something wrong before, or you had no controls before, or have you misdesigned your controls? But I mean, it's an interesting point that, a lot of times on the ethics side, you'll roll out a new compliance training module, and suddenly you'll see a spike in the hotline about, well, this is happening. Does that mean people are more aware of it, or does that mean nobody had bothered to report it, or something else? But I think it was just a great point. Maybe if you want to add a little more color there about what do you do if you suddenly see a spike in control activities, and what could that mean, and how would you think about how to simplify all of that?
And I think my point there really was kind of driving at is we should be looking at, do we have the right controls to mitigate the risk? And if before this happened, you had risks that you didn't document, you didn't have control activities, then you're going to see a spike there. The other piece is we sometimes come to organizations that are not doing any sort of control self-assessments or even control testing. And all of a sudden they're asking their first line to take part in this. That is a spike in control activity that users are not familiar with. And the challenge that oftentimes we see from the first line can be multiple fronts. Is we made the process too difficult? We never trained them on it? Or is this just a short-term bump where they're complaining because it's all new that we need to understand we got to get over this hump? Or is there something that we need to change in order to engage with them more effectively? I think all that becomes important. And then you bring in Alexa's point regarding, are we over controlling? Do we have zombie controls? I like the comment, Nick, you made about keeping the car from going off a cliff. But sometimes we forget that every road doesn't have a cliff. We only put guardrails when we have a dangerous spot. When we have straight open roads, we probably don't need to put controls there, except to the extent we think there's a risk that we need to mitigate. So understanding what your roads look like and where your risks are going to be important to building out your control program to be as effective as possible with the least amount of impact.
And to that point, like we have to get away from this false sense of security that we kind of create for ourselves in a lot of cases where we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to throw some more controls out there. I'm just going to, sprinkle my world with more controls and I can sleep well at night. Like, what is the actual benefit of the control? What is the negative externality that might create? And like, to your point, is a control even necessary on this straight road? Whatever, that smart thing you said, that.
So here's a good point from a listener who points out that what we are talking about right now is exactly what happened when Sarbanes-Oxley first came along. We implemented all these new controls. We promptly found out that financial reporting was a mess everywhere, and companies disclosed 2 zillion material weaknesses. Over time, they simplified all of that, and they reduced it down to fewer key controls that could serve multiple purposes.
Right.
And I guess maybe to what extent can we do the same with cybersecurity being the key control that satisfies all these other concerns we might have by framework 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that we have to worry about? Is that the right way to think about it? Alexa, let me ask you that first, and then Andrew, and then Nick.
Yeah, sure. And of course, that's SOX is also very much close to my heart. I agree that in the beginning, we are overperforming, let's say, in the beginning. So we are trying to address as many controls as we could. And in the SOX, we also can basically rely on SOX quite very much because there is a very good rule of how to determine the key control and the key risk. So we can mitigate the one key risk with multiple like key and non-key controls, but we need to think through it. So whether it's really mitigating, do we need to have another mitigating controls? Is it enough to have only one key control, or do we need 2 key controls? There is a thumb rule that one key risk needs to be mitigated at least by one key control. And I think it's even though it sounds like rigid, but I think it's very good approach. So it's natural to overperform in the beginning, but then what we call in the maturity flow, we need to rationalize and optimize that, and that's what we need to do on a constantly basis. And that to the point of Andrew, that we need to do it via the audits and the control assessment. That's where our second and the third lines of defense needs to also think about, not just to adding the more controls, doing this design and operating effectiveness, but also thinking from the perspective, is it really zombie controls, yes or no? Do we really need to have that controls in place? Maybe we were over engineering in the beginning. And we also need to address it to the board that it's very okay. And I think it's very good practice in the beginning to put a little bit more and then optimize, because it's also the change management. If you start adding more controls afterwards, then it will be considered as add-on. So that's also, we need to think about this psychological effect in place. Yeah.
Andrew, what would you say to that? And then Nick.
Yeah, I think there's just a natural tendency every time there's a new big reg, the type that everyone's talking about that's in the news, to assess this potentially higher. Not always the case, but oftentimes we end up saying this is going to be a bigger risk for our organization. It may or may not be having a bigger impact, and that ultimately results in us over controlling. And I don't want to say that's a universal rule, so by no means take that as that's always the case, but it's fairly common, and it makes sense too. It's the unknown, and the unknown can be scary, and because of the unknown, we'll add additional measures to making sure that we're reducing that risk to where we feel comfortable. And over time, we begin to reduce that. The one that came to mind of it never really materialized to the extent many of us thought it might, would be the conflict minerals back in, what was that, 2017, around that time, 2016. Yeah. And if you're in the big four, and I was at the time, there was that was the big conversation. This is coming. Organizations need to be prepared. And then it kind of hit without much fanfare from there. It wasn't quite as big of a deal as people thought. Yes, there was work. Yes, there was controls need to be put in place, but the hype didn't match the level of effort it really took in some instances to really get those programs in place.
But that's such a hard thing to battle against in real time when it's happening. Like human beings, we can think in straight lines. It's like we can think in algebra, but we can't think in statistics or something. Like we can't think in normal distribution. Like we have no idea what the standard deviation of some set of outcomes are. And so what are you queuing off of? You're queuing off of headlines. You're queuing off of, worst case scenario thinking, which a lot of us are wired for. And, that self-preservation thing that is in all of us. Yeah. So just, I think knowing exactly what you're talking about, knowing that human tendency exists, should allow us to at least play a little bit more of devil's advocate with ourselves about a new sort of layer of controls around some exogenous risk that might not even really intersect with our business.
One other question I wanted to sneak in here was, what do we actually mean when we say the word controls, which we have, among the four of us, we've probably uttered that word hundreds of times already in 45 minutes. And my brain defaults to what I call hardwired controls, like, is the amount more than this? We need 2 signatures. Have you entered in your multi-factor authentication and stuff like that? Hardwired controls. But is that right? And what about all of what I call the soft-wired controls, like good training, messaging from the CEO? Because we could have all sorts of good access controls, but ultimately, if an employee doesn't know to beware of strange emails and they click on the link, you're still going to wind up falling for a ransomware attack. So I struggle with, when we toss around the word controls, do we know whether we mean like hard controls, they're cybersecurity oriented, or is it more training people to keep their head in the game, and that's a soft control? What are we supposed to do there? I don't know who wants to take it first.
I don't know if I'm going to answer the question directly, but what I like about it is it talks about just that security becomes very layered, because we need those hardwired controls you're talking about. But just importantly, when we think about it from an enterprise risk down perspective, cybersecurity, we're concerned around ransomware, what's the real highest risk in that is like phishing attacks. And where does that come in is we can put as many hardwired controls as we can in place, but a individual in our company, a human, probably is going to be our weakest link. And that's where we can't ignore those soft controls. And this is where concepts like key risk indicators can come in and help actually begin to spot potential trends and maybe identify a risk before it actually becomes an incident. What are our training outcomes? What are the number of phishing attempts that we're seeing? Are we seeing a spike? All those things come into play where it goes beyond just pure control testing. Is it in place and it's effective?
Alexa, what would you say?
Yeah, and of course, that's also an interesting question. And my audit side is admiring the hard controls because they are so binary. It's they either work or don't. It's like in SOX, they either fail or pass.
Yeah,
easy to test, right?
Exactly, it makes so easy to test. But then when I'm wearing my compliance hat and a little bit more, not like to audit. I think the soft controls, they're very much important. They are like a glue because, so for instance, we always have this, handy guys who fixers, as I like them to call, helpful employee that want to find a way to bypass to get the job done. And in this case, these soft controls, they are very much important. And also echoing what Andrew said, it is about, it's very much important. And it's also about the governance, as wise people say that if you don't know what to do, where to start with governance. And basically that's the foundation of the governance. And it is also very much important, the soft controls in the change management discipline, which is very much important for the compliance, regardless whether it's a general compliance or cybersecurity. We need to train, does it really team understand why we need to have it? Is whether we are reinforcing it, whether everyone on the same page. So of course we can heavily rely on these hard controls or on the soft controls to stop a hacker. But we cannot rely on that, but we can really rely on them just to stop this internal workaround that opens the door for the hacker. That's we always need to remember.
I mean, there's some awareness layer that a hard control can address that maybe a soft control can't address. You know what I'm saying? But I think those soft controls, which I love that, I love this kind of framework, Matt. I think that those soft controls are really kind of the mortar and the wall of hard controls. They can kind of fill in the gaps. It's kind of if we can rely on that, or if we can tap into that tone from the top, if we can really roll out principles that really guide the risk management, apparatus across all these different functions and all these different actions that the people inside of our organization are doing, then that at least can give them a foundation to apply to a situation where there might not be that hard control in place because it was a zombie control, or because it's a situation that we haven't thought of. So it's kind of like you need both. You need both of those things, I think. And it's not an easy answer, right? I mean, that's why we all have jobs. That's why compliance is going to still be here, many, many years from now, because there's so many pieces on the board. There's not like a single sort of recipe to solve every chess problem. You know what I mean?
It strikes me that let's take multi-factor authentication as an example. There are many regulations that specifically say you must have multi-factor authentication to log into your key system. And if you don't, that's a compliance violation. So we go through all of this. But then what is more likely to happen at your company is somebody gets an email from, so-and-so, I'll click on the link. It's a ransomware attack. The board will then be saying, why did we spend so much effort on the multi-factor authentication when this is what screwed us up? And it puts compliance officers in a difficult position, or cybersecurity, or probably all three of you looking at your shoes, wondering, how did we get here? And so how to figure out the right balance, like you said, Nick, it takes two, but figuring out what the right balance is really hard.
But it just kind of takes that, to your point, it takes that continuous improvement mindset. It takes us not saying, okay, controls are done, now what? This is an organism. Our, risk management inside of an organization is an organism. It's changing all the time. It's faced with different viruses and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, we have to continually check the health of these things, these quote unquote controls. Are they actually working? Has the ground shifted beneath our feet? Are they actually serving us? And I think when we have that continuous mindset, lens, or that perspective, and we can bring that sort of beginner's eyes to whatever we're working on, the odds of us finding some of these things that are maybe not serving us, that are maybe creating this false sense of security, we can probably identify those things at a higher rate.
So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes here left before we have to wrap up. I also want to squeak in one last question too, is, okay, let's say this is a great idea. Everybody thinks in theory this is going to be awesome. We're going to build on cybersecurity and weave in GRC. Where does this go wrong in practice? Like, what miscommunications happen, or what turf battles might arise, and why do they arise? Like, for those listeners who think this sounds great, I'm going to try and do this at home, what mistakes should they avoid, or what likely trip-ups might they encounter? Andrew, I'll start with you, and then Alexa, and then Nick. How can this go wrong?
I think where I've seen this go wrong, particularly if we're going down this effort of alignment, is treating it as a minor side project. It is one of the spots I've seen it. And to that is, this requires alignment between groups that have deep-rooted processes that are going to be disrupted, potentially, now that they need to align and do things together. And that's not something that you can take a junior individual that may be new to the company, that doesn't have the knowledge and the history of what that group's trying to achieve and some of how they operate, and drop them into like a committee to say, solve the GRC issue. It requires individuals that understand the strategic mindset of your group, has some history around it, and also understands, like, at a level where they can make decisions and be empowered to make those decisions, and thinking about it holistically. Because where these times often goes, and I've had this happen before where I lead these type of conversations, is they bring in, I'm going to bring in Joe. He graduated 2 years ago. He's looking for a project. This will be perfect for him. But
he's great with computers.
Yeah. Yes. But he might be really good. But this is like thinking a very strategic level. And it just requires a deeper level of experience and knowledge about your organization and your function at the organization.
Alexa,
something Matt said that has stuck with me for years is that your value is not in your plan, but it's in your ability to plan. In the AI era, I'm going to update that a little bit. Like, our value is in our context window. Joe, in your example, has a very sort of limited context window. They don't, he doesn't know all the nuance. He doesn't know the relationships. He doesn't know the business and the risks of the industry and all that kind of stuff. We need to be building our context window as much as we can so that we can apply our strategic sort of compliance brain to that situation. Go ahead.
And the one thing I think I failed to mention there, you need the willingness of leaders to do this. If you have senior leaders saying this is important and set that vision, it's amazing how much faster things get done and they're willing to do this. But if you have this being a ground up where we just have some analysts and some senior consultants think this is a good idea, it's going to be really hard to move this. But I've seen this play out. I just had one where a new CEO came in and said, we are doing GRC. We have issues. Within months, we made more progress in 2 months than we did over the course of a whole year. It's just like that when you have senior leadership buy-in.
But I mean, to that point, sorry to jump in here, but to that point, we can't wait in the passenger seat of the car for hopefully we're going to get a GRC pro kind of like leader to come in. Like, we can do a lot to influence that. And I think I have this kind of $ rule. The last thing we want to do is go to that leader with a heat map unless it's all green. Okay. Dollars. Okay. So we have to figure out a way to connect with the nightmare that they want to avoid, whatever, to get it unlocked and get that endorsement. Because to your point, when you can get that endorsement, it starts to kind of knock down some of those silo walls that naturally erect within an organization, and you can make a lot more progress a lot faster. And then this thing that seems massive, that you're never, it seems like an insurmountable hill, it really becomes something that you can start to attack and make some real progress on.
Alexa, what would you say here? What's your common pitfalls you've seen or you would recommend people avoid?
Yeah, I think guys already covered a lot, so I would just very much agree with that. But I would also add something that we already discussed. I think it's biggest friction, and that's what I saw. Of course, it's not only about this alignment, but also the language. We touch upon this, that we are operating with the different frameworks, and we name the risk differently, but we're talking in the same things, and that's basically creating a lot of noise. So we need to align on this language. And another point as a trap or mistake that I also saw, it's a check the box trap, where we the compliance would say, okay, I need to have that evidence. This is the screenshot I need to know, I need to get. So should be the alignment, what we are achieving here, instead of just asking something that basically the cyber guys would never just do the screenshot because they hate that. We need to explain then why we need to have that evidence or that control. So basically avoiding this check the box. And the last, just a very quick, another mistake that I saw, it's a scope creep. Trying to do everything and align everything at once. So it's basically to do this iteratively, or maybe in this agile with the waves. So you need to start with what we call the critical assets, and basically do not put the rigor controls on the Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi. Then you are losing the interest of also the cyber team, because they are mainly considering that as a over engineering. So we need to align on that. What is the biggest and the most significant assets for us, and then we would start from there. Yeah.
Well, very good. This has been a fantastic session. So Alexa Vlasova and Andrew Gunter, thank you both very much. You covered a lot of ground for us. Nick, I'll let you wrap it up and tell people what's coming next. And
I just think we need to get a round of applause. This is the best Ethicsverse of the year right here. So next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we have a great session. We're going to be talking about bridging AI ambitions with your organizational preparedness. So this is a healthcare session, but just like if this was a cooking show, a general cooking show, you might want to pop into the French cooking show and get some new techniques. There's so much overlap between those. So that's going to be next Tuesday at noon. And then next Thursday at noon, coolest place to be, of course, we're going to be talking about compliance careers, how to build or join the right compliance team. And so if you're in between looking for a new opportunity, maybe the love is, all the love is gone in your current opportunity, or you love where you're at and you want to learn about how you can make that a lot better, we're going to be diving into that. Remember, this is your year. We've been talking about it. This is your year. grab the steering wheel of your career, grab the steering wheel of your program, and it's on you to drive that where it needs to be. So I love you all. So glad to be back to the Ethicsverse, and we will see you next Tuesday and next Thursday at noon Eastern. Take care.
Thank you.